Welcome to Let's Hear It.
Let's Hear It is a podcast for and about the field of foundation and nonprofit communications, produced by its two co-hosts, Eric Brown and Kirk Brown. No relation.
Well said, Eric. And I'm Kirk.
And I'm Eric. The podcast is sponsored by the College Futures Foundation, which envisions a California where post-secondary education advances equity and unlocks upward mobility now and for generations to come. To learn more, visit collegefutures.org.
You can find Let's Hear It on any podcast subscription platform.
You can find us online at letshearitcast.com. You can find us on LinkedIn and, yes, even on Instagram.
And if you like the show, please rate us on Apple Podcasts so that more people can find us.
So let's get on to the show.
Welcome in, welcome back. Glad to see you. Glad you found us. We found you. It's Let's Hear It. You're with us.
There's a lot of foundlings going on right now.
We're finding things. You know, I heard recently somebody hates the expression welcome in. It's actually a pet peeve of theirs.
Oh, really?
I push back. I like welcome in. You're welcome.
Did you welcome them in as they were hating on it?
I didn't have the opportunity. I just thought it was interesting. It made them really angry. The expression made them really angry.
Oh, interesting. It's you, Kirk.
No,
they don't hate you. I'm saying that the expression is very you. You're a welcome in sort of person. In another life, you'd have been a Walmart greeter.
You may be surprised. I might actually be a Walmart greeter already.
If this communications thing doesn't work out, you might want to hone those welcome in skills.
So I suggest that we take a ride up the circular staircase. What do you think about that?
As long as we're going up.
Set this up. This is a great conversation.
Well, I was kind of needing a little bit of... Well, okay, I take it back. I was excited to speak with Takema Robinson, who's the CEO and co-founder of a social justice consulting firm called Converge. I just looked at her work. She seemed really interesting, and I thought this was going to be an interesting conversation, but I didn't realize how much I needed that conversation at that time. And it was just after the election, so not that long ago. And as we speak right now, this is our last episode of 2024. So we're going to leave folks with what I hope is a sense of optimism and hope going into the holiday season and thinking into the new year at a time when I think a lot of people are very, very correctly, myself included, feeling a little, worked, feeling a little troubled. And my conversation with Takema helped me go through that because she reminded me about long-term thinking. I won't say too much more about it than that, other than that Takema was a delight and just exactly what I needed that day.
Yeah, as the year comes to a close, let's take a deep breath. Let's restore ourselves. Let's recognize we're not defeated. And if you want to listen to folks who understand this long arc of history as it bends towards justice and the folks stoking the flames and doing the bending, it's folks like Takema Robinson. So this was a great conversation, Eric. Thank you for bringing Takema onto our air. So listen, this is Takema Robinson on Let's Hear It.
Welcome to Let's Hear It. My guest today is Takema Robinson, the CEO and co-founder of Converge, a Black woman-owned social justice consulting firm that's helping to create a radically just new world where communities of color thrive. Takema, thank you so much for speaking with me today.
Thank you for the invitation, Eric.
It's a pleasure. So I guess my first question is, how you doing?
How am I doing? We're sitting here. What has it been? A week? It's been a week post-election. So I have gone through probably all the phases of grief. So maybe first and foremost, acknowledging that there is some grief energy that I am processing, some collective grief as well. But I remain hopeful. So that's how I'm doing today.
All right. I'm on my third round of grief.
It comes in rounds. It comes in rounds. It comes in waves, Eric.
I try to complete each round effectively, and then I start over. I have a 28-year-old child, and I say to them, we've been through this before. We will be through this again. If life is like a circular staircase where you feel like you're in the same place, but actually you're going up, then that's okay too. We're just learning and growing and processing and all that other stuff. Well, Takema, I was so excited to learn about your work. And I'm always curious and eager to meet people who are supporting nonprofit organizations, for-profit companies, other folks with an understanding of how do we help these organizations or partner with them or work together to advance social justice in all sorts of forms. And now you started this firm called Converge. And can you just tell me a little bit about it?
Yeah, thank you so much. Love our mission statement, which is to create a radically just new world where communities of color thrive. And for us, that is really the spirit of what we do, because we actually believe that, particularly within the American context, when communities of color thrive, we all are thriving, right? If we understand how this country was created, we know when the least of us are heard and supported, whether it be differently able people of color, that we all thrive from the innovations and the advancements that our society makes to be inclusive of all of us. And I think we continue to lean into that mission. I worked in New Orleans in the Gulf Coast post Katrina, and I had come there from the Northeast where we were well resourced with nonprofits and philanthropic support. And here we are with America's largest natural disaster being Katrina, hitting the Gulf Coast in 2005 and impacting some of the most vulnerable communities in our country in the Deep South. And so that really inspired me, being on the front lines of that work, working in philanthropy at the time. I got to see the work of amazing nonprofit leaders who were doing so much with so little, even without the support of government. And that really inspired me to birth Converge. And what that was about was really trying to stand in the gap between those nonprofits and philanthropy, and to be able to serve those leaders and those organizations on the front lines with consulting services for social justice. And so we've been proud to do that for the last 10 years. And to watch many of those leaders grow into the formidable national leaders that they are now, because we certainly believe that the South of America is really the front line for social justice in this nation, and that those leaders, particularly in this moment, have something to teach all of us.
That's for sure. Now your background, people come to this work from such interesting places. And as I've said many times, no little child climbs up into their parents' beds, Mommy, Daddy, I want to go into nonprofit communications. We just end up there. And now you have a background in art.
I do.
Can you talk about that?
I do. And it really is my love. It is my passion. But interestingly, I think my love for both art and social justice come from an inner yearning for liberation. And whether it be finding liberation through creativity or finding liberation through social justice, I think much of the impetus of my life and my purpose has been about finding and seeking freedom. And so I actually see the two as the same thing. And I also think, as I majored in African American studies and political science, there's so much creativity that's involved in those sciences. They're more of a creative practice sometimes than a scientific practice. And I've learned a lot from artists about how to imagine a future, how to envision a world, right? These are our Imagineers. And yeah, I love sitting at that intersection of art, culture, and justice. And I find that I am more of a creative than I am a scientist. And I bring that to the work of social justice and political science.
And this notion of using art as liberation, as I'm sitting here, gee, that's such a good idea. Why didn't I think of that? But you're right.
But you know what? But think about it. It's the radical. So I talk a lot about this concept of radical imagination. And thinking about my own background as an African American, I think about my generations of my family that were born in bondage, that had to imagine freedom. They had to conceptually find someplace in their imagination where they understood that the current condition that they were in was not humane, and that their humanity demanded something more than that current condition. And that can only be found in their imagination. If they had never seen it before, it can only be found in their humanity. So to me, I'm always inspired by that, what people imagine for me. And I think a lot also about ancestry and what people before me imagine, and I get to live inside of their imagination. There's a saying that says, I am my ancestors' wildest dreams. I am a product of dreaming. I am a product of imagination. And that's how I think about the fusion of those two things.
That's so interesting. Often we go straight to our intellectual hive minds when we think about a project or goals or any this other kind of thing. And I grew up in the theater as well. I used to do art. Like, I was an artistic person once, but you're reminding me how important it is to use that creativity in ways that we don't tend to do. Can you talk just a little bit about how you bring? It's obvious that you bring this into your work every second of the day. How does that go? I'm excited to hear about that.
Yeah, you know what's so funny, Eric? We could talk for days about this, because I actually used to run in high school that was all about integrating the arts and academics. And I just think where we are right now, even in America, we are starving from a lack of imagination. We're starving. Our society is starving. We need Imagineers, right? We need people who can imagine a more inclusive future, right? Where our humanity is more important than white supremacy or capitalism. But we have to imagine ourselves in there. It is really the limitations of our imagination that I think that have our society stuck, right? We can't imagine ourselves beyond these racial categories. We can't imagine ourselves around these policy conundrums. We can't imagine ourselves beyond a two-party system. So a lot of what we're facing is a crisis of imagination.
We just got through an election that was all about fear.
All about fear. Imagined fear.
But it was about imagined fear, but it was not about creativity. It was not about building. It was about breaking. It was a conversation about retreating and building walls and digging whatever you want to call them, bunkers or other. I mean, you can use every kind of war metaphor you can think of. But this notion about positioning ourselves for imagining a better future, about imagining how we work together, imagining how we get along, it was missing completely. It was just gone. And you see what happens when we lose that sense of creativity and positive imagination.
Absolutely.
Do you have other thoughts about what you have seen recently and how and we'll talk in the second part of this, we'll talk more about the future. But again, how do you tap into that positive creativity, that positive imagination?
I think that we have to be careful about what we're being fed in our society and through our media. We really do dine on a diet of fear in America. Most of our media, whether it be left or right, is still very fear-based. And I think fear is the first thing that shuts our imagination down, right? Because now we have to go into a survival mode. Now we have to constrict ourselves. We have to bring ourselves just back into a me and mine, an us versus them kind of paradigm. And so I think we have to be really careful about what we're feeding ourselves and what we're feeding our minds and where we're putting our energy and focus. Yeah, and I think we can bring more of what we have known from artistic practice. I think tapping into that more expansive, more abundant imagination requires, again, us not to be in the presence of fear, but to also really be grounded in, first and foremost, our own humanity. And we live in a society that is moving so quickly, right? So not just what are we feeding on in terms of fear, but also the pace of our society does not allow us those moments to sit with ourselves and to be really clear about what is possible. I'm really hoping that these circumstances will force us into that space, into a more reflective space, force us to really slow down and not just do, and really think beyond the present moment and think a little bit more long term. And hopefully this election gives us the next 4 years to do that.
Yeah, we're going to spend a fair amount of time contemplating our navels, I'll tell you that much. You talk about taking care of yourself.
I tried.
And you certainly have done that. I moved to Jamaica. Can you talk a little bit about that? That's so incredible.
But it was about many of the things that I talked about, slowing down, a different pace of life, and being able to clear the space for myself as a leader to have the type of grounded clarity that I need to have to vision and imagine in terms of what's required of me. So yeah, I moved in 2020 to Jamaica, and I have found that space of solace and solitude, and also perspective, right? Because leaving the United States has given me a global perspective, and it's also just helping me see like how we function inside with 50 states versus how the world functions outside of that. And no, that was really important for me. Even while my work is 100% vested in the States, it was really important for me to step out and get a bigger perspective and to slow down and get clear.
Yeah. So not the last stop on the F train, Jamaica, the Caribbean nation, Jamaica.
Not sure Jamaica, Eric.
Not Jamaica.
Not Jamaica I hail from.
Let's talk a little bit about Converge, about the practice and who you're working with these days.
Yeah. So I am really gifted to work with an amazing team of practitioners, folks who have been in this work for a while, who are on my team and our partners who remain committed to racial equity, social justice. Our clients include nonprofits. We work very closely with the ACLU. We've been working with them on a stunning project to work across the South and be more strategic. We also do work with philanthropic organizations who are committed to moving resources to social justice issues, as well as family foundations who, again, are trying to do the right thing with their wealth. So we get an opportunity to work with folks who are open to expanding their imagination around what's possible with resources and what we want the world that our children to inherit to look like.
We're going to take a very quick break and be back with Takema Robinson right after this.
You're listening to Let's Hear It, a podcast about foundation and nonprofit communications, hosted by Eric Brown and Kirk Brown. If you're enjoying this episode, you may just be a rule breaker. Tune in to Break Fake Rules, a new limited series podcast with Glenn Galich, CEO of the Stupski Foundation. Hear from leaders in philanthropy, nonprofits, government, media, and more to learn about challenges they've overcome by breaking fake rules and which rules we should commit to breaking together. We are also sponsored by the Conrad Prebys Foundation. Check out their amazingly good podcast, and we're not just saying that, Stop and Talk, hosted by Prebys Foundation CEO Grant Oliphant. You can find them at stopandtalkpodcast.com. And now, back to the show.
Welcome back to Let's Hear It. My guest today is Takema Robinson, the CEO and co-founder of Converge. And as we now are processing this election and what it means for us, we are also, I think, examining this question around racial justice, around equity. There will be people who will say that the reason that the Democrats lost was because they were talking about these things. And to me, that just feels perfectly and entirely wrong. But I'd like to get your own take on where the status of the movement is and how we can build on this, learn from it, and move forward.
This is pretty raw, Eric, because I am still in the process of processing it myself. I'm proud to call many, particularly in Black women, leaders, good friends who are on the front lines of pushing Vice President Harris forward and supporting that work. Many of them are very much in mourning right now, and not just mourning the outcome, but mourning the effort that was put into this. And so I just really want to shout out and give a lot of respect to Black women leaders and Black women voters who never failed us. So just want to make sure we begin with those acknowledgments. But I think that it means that there is a lot of work to be done. I tell people all the time, it's a lot easier to talk about the Republican Party, a lot simpler. I think they're a lot more homogenous than the left. And we have a much bigger tent with a lot more people and interests, sub-interests to accommodate and to make sure are included. I have a lot of critiques. I have a lot of critiques myself that I think are really important for the Democratic Party to look at. I think we all know that the timing that Vice President Kamala Harris was put into was already back against the wall. Many Black women leaders, we know what that means to show have to have that level of responsibility put on us in the fourth quarter of the game. Just acknowledging that was what we were up against. But also, I think that there was a conversation that we have continued to backburn about a third party, because I think we're often progressives, radicals, liberals, right? Those are three different sets of groups that we're trying to organize just under the Democratic Party.
Right.
I think those three groups didn't have a meeting. There was no time to come to some clarity. And I think we have to acknowledge that there was a lot of splintering even between those particular factions, those folks who find themselves left of center, liberal, progressives, down to the radicals, that those things also splintered apart. And we can't ignore what that was caused by. And the current administration's stance on Gaza, I don't think was factored into what these results would look like. And I think we have to sit with that. So I just think that there is a lot of work that has to happen on the left side of this conversation. And I think that we have to really get in a room with one another and either decide that this is something we can build together, or it's time to put some real energy into a third party option that may better represent those parts of the Democratic Party that did not feel heard in this election.
Mm. And what kind of conversations are you having with your clients who are working on racial justice and equity?
I think many of them are moving first into a space of safety. They're thinking first and foremost about security and safety of their grantees, of people in their community that they serve, who may be targets of this administration and of its policies. They're trying to fortify them before this comes down. I think everybody is really moving into that mode of security and safety. Has mostly been the message. A lot of people sending out letters, communicating to the field that we see you, we got you, we're not going anywhere, and that in the next couple of days and weeks, we really need to figure out how to make sure folks are first and foremost safe. That's been the major tone that I think has been going on in a lot of those letters that I've received and a lot of conversations off our leaders. We're in a mode around safety. We've seen this, and we know that this time it's going to be even more.
Yeah, Kamal Bell said to take care of yourselves. It's like putting the oxygen mask on before you help your kids on the plane. That folks have to get themselves into the right place so that they can begin to think about the future. I go back to your notion of Imagineering, because I do think that when at moments like this, it is also an opportunity to think differently, and that this is a really good time for that. The decks are cleared for good or ill, mostly for ill, but still, it might open up an opportunity for something more interesting, more dynamic, more engaging. How are you thinking about what does that future look like to you? What does a better multiracial democracy, you name it, what does the world look like to you now that we have almost permission to dream again? Because the old, like, whatever we were doing, some of it didn't work, or not enough of it did work. And so we have the chance to build. What does that feel like and look like?
You know what's so interesting is, there's this notion of make America great again. And I would say make America great for the first time, right? Like, I don't know if people of color, minorities, or LGBTQ folks have ever experienced that America that we want to go back to. What we continue to show up for, though, is this possibility of America, right? This possibility of America that was cast. And that is the thing that we continue to try to go back to bring forward and into fruition. And I think that's a really interesting notion that we keep trying to return to, what, for better or worse, was more marketing material than it was reality for anyone. And so I think it's time to revisit in the collective what is an inclusive America that makes space for all of us, that makes space for the generations that are coming, that are browner, that are Blacker, that are more female, that are more pansexual, right? What is the future that we're building for this next generation that does not reflect the current popular vote in America, right? Who our young people are asking for an expansion of their rights, whether it be reproductive rights or their rights and access to services as trans people, right? So I think I'm looking for an America that reflects the future and these future generations that I believe are just more naturally inclusive of themselves and of one another. And even with this setback, I still pray and ground myself in the notion that demography is destiny. And I believe that our young people will save this country and have already shown us that they are brave and that they are courageous and that they have the imagination that we are lacking.
When you have these conversations with clients, I needless to say, everyone's going to ask you, what do we do now specifically? How do we think through a strategy in the future? What are some of the first conversations going to look like? What are the questions you're going to ask them? How are you going to help them think through what the next 6 months and a year and 4 years looks like?
So the first thing I'm going to say is we can't do it until you calm down. until we until you get grounded and until we can do that in a space where fear is not the impetus. Love must be the impetus of our imagination. And so a lot of what we're doing right now is just helping our clients express themselves, walk through the grief process, and get grounded with 10 toes down before we can jump into the strategy work. We have to honor the space that we're in right now. And I think people are still processing. And then I think we will be more equipped to jump into the strategy work. And I think when we jump into the strategy work, we need to be thinking long-term strategy, right? We got here because there was a multi-decade strategy, whether it was to get the courts or the local legislators or the state houses, right? We have to plan in generational increments and not just in 4-year presidential cycles, which is what we find ourselves doing on the left. We need to go take care of our business. And like I said, have those hard conversations amongst ourselves about where we're divided. We have to begin to lay the groundwork for work that we may not see blossom for another 10 or 15 years. As many of my mentors have told me, we have to play chess and not checkers. And so you can't do strategy work if you're coming in with anxiety and frantic energy. We need leaders that are grounded, that are poised and rested.
That's so interesting. Yeah, it's almost like you bring a large set of paper bags for everybody to breathe into. So
we're going to do some yoga. We're going to do some meditation. We're going to do some somatic work because that's what's required of leaders in this moment when we as leaders are being looked to help folks ground and find their way. And so we can't do strategy work if we're bringing that kind of energy to it. So that's the first thing that we are helping people do, is to breathe through this, to get through this moment of panic and anxiety and get to a place where we can be clear-headed and flat-footed about a long-term future.
I think your point about the long-term thinking, though, is essential. And for funders out there, we all know funders, I used to work for a foundation. I could speak for my people or my former people. They like the shiny thing. They want to see results. They want to see results soon. But the fact of the matter is that change takes time, and that the funders who are patient over long periods of time, and we're talking about decades, not grant cycles, are the ones who will achieve the things that they're trying to achieve. And that kind of patience is, I think, something we all have to be preaching first, second, and third. We got to be patient. We have to think about this in the long term. And
absolutely.
Yeah. And it's hard. It's hard because most people's time horizons at a foundation are shorter
than the time horizons of the work that you're trying
to do. The impact. And Eric, I've done a lot of work in philanthropy. A big part of my career has been there. And I'm proud that it's slowly changing. I operate in the 10% of philanthropy that supports social justice work. And I think we are beginning to see more patient capital, much larger investment, much longer investment. And it will take time for those things to mature. Just like I said in our first segment, reflecting on the work I've done in the South, like Georgia is almost a swing state because of those investments. North Carolina is almost a swing state because of those investments. Florida's going the wrong direction. We still have infrastructure across the region we didn't have 10 years ago. Stacey Abrams is a result of those types of investments. And so we also have proof points now, right? Even if we're not necessarily haven't had the full impact, we have proof points that we're headed in the right direction. And that's the way that we hope philanthropy continues to invest.
I have to say that this was a really nice therapy session.
Good. I like that for Eric.
You're a fabulous therapist. And I really appreciate your work, what you do, your approach to this work. I'm deeply grateful for you and the work that you're doing. I can't thank you enough. Takema Robinson, CEO, co-founder of Converge. Thank you so much for this. Thank you for helping me.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you, too. It means a lot to just build this kind of community. And that's what we need right now. We need to all be able to catch our breath, or to be in community, because that's what heals all of us. And that's what's going to get us through.
I couldn't agree more. Thank you again.
All right. Thanks, Eric.
And we're back. So I have to say the circular staircase, steadily moving, but not knowing exactly what direction, but knowing we needed to hear that, right? And so
is that metaphor working for you, Kirk?
It really is. I'm holding on to it. My knuckles are white. I'm not going to let it go.
Right now, I've been experiencing a lot of circular firing squad, but I think that the circular staircase is a better image.
Well, Takema's been doing this. So she's co-founded Converge, but she's been doing this for 20 years and has worked across, my gosh, I mean, the Packard Foundation, Blue Meridian, Steven Spielberg's Heartland Foundation. She's touched philanthropy in all of its shapes and sizes, and also has been involved with some incredible on-the-ground policy initiatives in a whole bunch of different places, including Louisiana. So tell me about Takema. How did you find Takema? And tell me about this conversation.
Well, this is one of those things that you can't remember where you met somebody or where you found out about them, but they were always stuck in your mind and you always wanted to have that conversation. And that's what happened. It was one of these, we really need to talk with Takema. And so I had an idea as we were in the break that we probably should get some Let's Hear It branded paper bags.
Do tell.
For people to breathe into.
There you go. Right. Balancing, centering.
Moderate their respiration.
Right. You start feeling sick to your stomach, it just helps you.
You get a little dizzy, you just pull out your Let's Hear It paper bag and you breathe into it. But Takema is such an interesting person. And it is important when you do, I believe, when you do social justice work, and that you have to maintain both your sense of optimism and joy and your understanding about the timeframes that we're working in. And I think that she has that exactly right. I think she really does have this grounded understanding about what the opportunities are, what the challenges are, and the time that it's going to take in order to achieve them, so that you can stay grounded and sane while you're doing this work. And I also came up with the image of what kind of dog do you need for this work? Do you want a Chihuahua or a Saint Bernard? Someone who's like yipping and yapping and doing all kinds of crazy stuff, or somebody who's just going to slowly walks up the Alps with the brandy around their neck to save the hiker. And I think the Saint Bernard might be a better model.
Yeah, there you go. Well, one of the things I loved about your conversation with Takema, and here's an avid advocate for Black women. And has there been a constituency that's done more to support our progressive values and our progressive priorities than Black women? I think not, perhaps. And that Takema's doing this work with Converge based in New Orleans and doing this work in all parts of the country, but including the South and the Deep South. It's funny. I feel like we get to invite some of our voices of privilege into this conversation because we have tons of people in our country who are familiar with needing to do this work in the most difficult of circumstances, doing this work one step, one breath, one moment at a time. It doesn't always look that promising. The balance of power can be organized heavily, not in our favor, and yet you can still create real change. And hearing Takema talk about working in ways to help communities of color specifically thrive and do this in areas of the country where that challenge and that battle has been most difficult to succeed in. These are the kind of voices I think we need to hear right now because we're about to enter a period that I think many of us think is going to be so difficult for so many people. And yet voices like this can show us the way forward and help us keep doing the work, even though the circumstances feel so difficult.
I completely agree with you. And this is one of these, I mentioned the circular firing squad. You look at folks coming out of the election, they go, oh, here's what we did wrong. We talked too much about racial justice. We didn't talk about the middle class enough. We didn't communicate to those people who went populist on us enough and so on. And many of those things may be right and wrong at the same time. But the really important thing now is to take that real step back and look at, I had this conversation the other day with another colleague, which is let's also look at what went right. Mm-hmm. Let's look at where messages worked. Let's look at districts or communities or constituencies in which there were victories. There were a bunch of House races that flipped, and some of them were more centrist, but some of them weren't. And just like, let's take real stock of where we are, because I think that we have this tendency to go whipsawing from one thing to the other, to the other, to the other. And that is not long-term thinking. That is as short-term thinking as you can have. And I completely agree with Takema that now she's looking at generational change, and I get that, and demographic change, and I get that too. But demographics are not people. They're just, large numbers of things. And we at the same time, we have to be thinking about how are these really important constituencies that we have had long relationships with. How do you nurture them? How do you think about them? How do you build them for the future? How do you take that and also look at the various other places in our country where there is need, and how do we bring that message together into something that we can all coalesce around, rather than going bonking from left to right, left center to right center to left center to right. So like, that's crazy. And I just don't think you can build any long-term change that way. And so that's my kind of where I totally agree with Takema about building these long-term relationships, understanding that these things take time, not giving up even when something doesn't go our way necessarily, and building for the future. I was really kind of inspired by that. And it reminded me that, we have done a lot and we are going somewhere and we can get there, but we really have to be able to, we have to keep our heads on our shoulders rather than going into a great big headless chicken freak out.
Yeah, and letting our lived experience and the work in the field actually guide us, because we're having, legitimate experiences, talking about this stuff and dealing with people in a real way. Yeah, no, it's interesting, Eric, in terms of that stock taking, part of this too is each of us doing our own research, that the latest numbers that I'm seeing out of the presidential, this election was decided by 760,000 votes across the swing states, right? The national margin is 1.6%, but the margin within these swing states is even closer. And so, we're really on the margins here in terms of the broader picture. But I think many of us would agree too that there's deeper work yet to be done, particularly as we come to this conversation about communications and how to speak effectively and with urgency and with saliency and with authenticity across all of these different communities that we know we're trying to mobilize. And folks like Takema can actually help us see what that looks like, because they are in the field doing the work in a meaningful way day in, day out. And so for me, that's one of the big headlines always. And it's kind of shocking to me that still so many decades into this, we're coming off another one of these major inflection moments saying, what could we have done to communicate more effectively? Could we have been in the field more effectively? Could we have been more consistent with our messaging and more and brought more people in? So, and again, I look at the work that Converge is doing, and I think, my gosh, these are the folks that can help us organize our thinking, help us sort our way forward in a way that that can help us create real change and lasting change.
Yeah, I agree. And I don't know, nobody has the perfect answer, and things go wrong. There's just no question that things go wrong, or the times are, you are sometimes, whatever, paddling upstream or something like that. We're in this weird kind of populist bottleneck, or if you want to call it that. And people are frustrated and they're concerned, and there's a lot of change and a lot of fear. And the hardest thing to do is to have the kind of imagination and creativity that Takema talks about, in which you do imagine a better future in ways that bring people along, that inspire them to move forward. And that thing that she said about, I am my ancestors' wildest dream is really exciting. And it's really powerful and important. And the question is, what is our wildest dream? And
Yeah.
which of our ancestors will have the opportunity to achieve that? And then what will it take to get there? And how do we work towards that? And how much, and understanding that these things will take time. And getting back to funders, if I was a funder, I would be thinking about what are my ancestors, what are my afterbears' wildest dreams, or what are my wildest dreams for the people who come after me, and what will it take to get there, and how much money, and what are the conditions that have to prevail, and how do I make those conditions riper, and be there for that, and set things in motion. Because I think, as I told Takema, the foundation strategies have a tendency to mirror foundation staff times. So,
Yeah.
in the foundation, everybody averages around 12 years. Well, the strategies have a tendency to have about a 12-year arc.
Yeah.
I'm guessing. At Hewlett, we had 8-year term limits, and so our strategies had an 8-year arc, give or take.
Yeah. Yeah.
So anyway, so that's my little take on that, which is that kind of long-term thinking and real creativity is essential. And without it, then we just do the circular firing squad and keep looking back at what we did wrong, and then overcorrect and end up in a kind of, this back and forth thing that is not good. It is not good for the future.
Yeah. Yeah, no, well, I love Takema's mention of sort of unlocking our positive imagination instead of just, all of us consuming this diet of fear. I want to do a shout out to another podcast. Pod Save America had the Harris campaign team on a November 26th episode. It was really interesting to listen to it. And in terms of your, let's understand what went on and what went wrong part. One of the most interesting parts of that conversation for me, and this was just mentioned in one sentence in passing, was a knowing comment that the Harris folks said to each other about just the repetition with which their opposition's messaging was everywhere, all the time, across all formats, across all media, that the communications environment that they found themselves in was being dominated by opposition messages. And so for me, I think that's one of the big telling parts of all of this is, in terms of that inventory work that we need to do, could we just sum up? Let's make a list. How often are we out there? How often are they out there? And what's cutting through more effectively, right? And that's not even about this policy or that policy, that message or that message. It's really about what has our investment been in creating the backbone and the infrastructure it requires to be everywhere all the time. Because you've said, Eric, you don't get to choose which medium you're in, right? You need to assume your audience is in every one of them and work all of them. It's quite possible that one of our big takeaways from this election is that we didn't do as good of a job, right? Is that and so anyway, so that's just one of my things I think about.
I think there's two things going on there, Kirk, which is, one of them is what are your tactics? Are you everywhere all the time, and are you consistent with your message? The other thing is, what are you saying? And,
what are you talking about?
And it is so much easier to sow fear and the hatred, frankly, and distance and separation, easier to break than to build. So they have the, whatever. If we want to talk war metaphors, they have the high ground position. And the people who are talking about the future and hope and connection and bridging, we are on the low ground and there's a moat and someone's pouring hot oil down on us. And therefore, you can be as disciplined as you like and be in every single media market and every platform and everything and have every celebrity and all that other jazz. But you're telling a different story and you're painting a different picture, and it makes it harder. And the trick is, though, that the power of that connection, of that hopeful, creative Imagineering is valuable and wonderful, and it gives people joy, and it gives you something to build on. And these guys, they just wanted to break, and now they have this thing, and it's broken, and they're going to continue to break it because they don't care. And that's how they keep power, and that's how they do all that stuff. So it is much harder to be positive and to be hopeful. And so you could be basically tied in tools. But if you are breaking, it's so much easier just to, throw grenades into the opposition and they splinter and fall apart. And it's much easier to win that way. But that's life. Too bad. That's why we're progressives, because we have hope and we're trying to build and, bridge across differences and things like that. It's twice as hard, but tough luck. That's what we got. So
that's what we got. That's the work we're gonna keep doing it, and we're gonna keep grounding that work in authentic relationship that really authentically brings people into this conversation and makes them central parties to it. So let's listen to Converge talk about this in their own words. So they understand that power concedes nothing without a demand, citing Frederick Douglass, and shifting power requires risk and exponential growth. So Converge is committed to the creation of a radically just new world where communities of colors thrive because, as Asada Shakur reminds us, we have nothing to lose but our chains. That's it, Mr. Brown. We have nothing to lose but our chains. These are the voices we need to listen to help guide us out of this wilderness.
And I respect those voices so very much, and it was delightful to speak with Takema. She made me feel better. I hope she made everybody else out there feel better. And for the Pod Save America people who are listening to the show, thank you very much for your episode. I will go back and listen to it. Maybe we'll do an episode exchange or something like that.
That's great. Takema, thank you so much for coming on. Let's hear it. That was awesome. Eric, thank you for that conversation. And for all of you, this is our last episode in 2024. Thanks for being with us these past years, and we will see you raring to go in 2025. Mr. Brown, thank you so much.
All right. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. We'll see you next time. Okay, everybody, that's it for this episode. Please let us know if you have any thoughts about what you heard today or people we should have on this show, and that definitely includes yourself. And we'd like to thank
our indefatigable producer, Harper Brown,
John Ali, the tuneful and inspiring composer of our theme music,
our sponsor, the Lumina Foundation.
And please check out Lumina's terrific podcast, Today's Students, Tomorrow's Talent, and you can find that at luminafoundation.org.
We certainly thank today's guest, and of course, all of you.
And most importantly, thank you, Mr. Brown.
Oh, no. Thank you, Mr. Brown.
Okay, everybody. Until next time.